Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Kerry Chilton. I'm from the Disability Law Center of Virginia. I'm one of our staff attorneys. Our great tech guy, Devin, here is going to be helping me today manage our chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and he will forward them on to me. In this session today, we're going to be talking about special education IEP meetings and strategies for parents to self-advocate at these IEP meetings. Now, I do have a quick disclaimer first before we dive into it. All the information that we're providing today is not legal advice. Special education matters are extremely fact-specific. Whether or not a certain rule or law applies and what's the best course of advocacy really varies case by case. So it's important to know that, all your general questions today, throw them at me. I'm happy to answer them. But if you have something that's fact specific to your child or someone you're working with, and you're looking for more individual advocacy or legal advice on those issues, feel free to call our advocate on duty Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and they can assist you further in requesting advocacy services from dLCV. So I want to start by talking about before the IEP meeting, because a lot of IEP meetings, people are really nervous about the IEP meeting itself, and a way to combat that is to really prepare for the IEP meeting ahead of time. And preparation is key in feeling more comfortable and ready to go when we get to the IEP meeting. You want to make sure that you review relevant information from your child's educational record. So the last IEP, if any draft IEP has been sent, recent evaluations. If you don't have any of these documents on hand, request them from the school and make sure you request that the school send them to you several days ahead of time. Be specific in that request. I know parents are very busy, especially right now. So having a few days to look over that and really prepare is helpful. I always make a second copy of those documents. So I've got a clean copy that I'm able to make more copies of if I need to give them to my child's or the child I'm working with's provider. And then I have that other copy that I can highlight. I can put notations and questions next to things, really mark it up. So I always make sure I have that clean copy and the copy I'm going to mark up when I'm preparing for an IEP meeting. Also, another good tip here, especially when you're doing an annual IEP, look through the plop, and for every area of need identified in the plop, highlight it with a different color marker. So maybe you've got your math needs in the plop highlighted in green and social emotional needs highlighted in blue. Then go through the rest of that draft IEP or the last IEP you're looking at and highlight in the same color any accommodations, services, goals, anything else in the IEP that relates to that need. Then, based on the color, you can really see for each need what services, accommodations, and goals are going towards working on that need. And that helps you really visually, at least for me, I'm a very visual person, being able to break down, okay, this is the need, and are we adequately meeting it, or do we need some extra supports? Or maybe we're throwing too many supports at this need. This is something that was a greater need, but it's been kind of more met now, and we can pull some of those resources away and put them towards another need that's maybe emerged. So really taking a look at that and color coding can be very helpful. Next, you want to make, while you're preparing, a list of talking points and questions. IEP meetings can sometimes go in different directions. We've got 8, 10 people sometimes at the table all talking, and you really want to make sure that questions you have or items you want to talk about are addressed through that meeting. So having a list that you prepare ahead of time and then at the meeting you can check through it as you go is very helpful to making sure you don't come out of the meeting and go, oh no, I forgot to talk about that very important thing, or I never got that question answered. So making that list as you go through and prepare is very helpful. The next thing you want to do while preparing for an IEP meeting is really consider if you want to invite anybody else to the IEP meeting. So parents and the school both have the right to invite anyone with knowledge or special expertise of the student. So that means that parents can invite anyone who knows the student, anyone who's worked with the student. That could include a coach or a mentor that's been really successful in working with your child and knows your child's needs. That could be a therapist who's worked privately with your child outside of the school setting. It could be a friend of yours who knows the child really well, who's able to come and help take notes, or maybe think of other questions while the discussion's going on that you're not able to think about because you're really focused on the conversation at hand. So that's something else to consider while you're preparing for this meeting. The next step after you've kind of done that preliminary prep is prior to the meeting, a few days in advance, is making sure that you touch base with the school. And there's a few things you want to work with or talk to the school about prior to that IEP meeting day, so that you have those matters out of the way and you're really ready to go and discuss what needs to be discussed at the IEP meeting. Make the most of that limited time. The first is if there's a school evaluation that's being reviewed at that meeting, not one that you've previously had access to or previously discussed, but a brand new evaluation that's going to be gone over at that meeting. You want to first ask that you get that evaluation X amount of days ahead of time. If you know you're going to be very busy through the week and you need it kind of the weekend ahead to be able to review it, do that. If there's been some delays with the evaluation and you think it's worth pushing the IEP meeting further back a little bit so you have time to really review that, that's something to consider too. This is your chance to really talk with people from the school about that evaluation, what it needs or what it means, needs that are identified in it, and where to go from there. So making sure you've read it ahead of time and understand it, or if you don't understand it, a lot of times there's very specific jargon and language in there that can be hard to understand if you're not an expert in that field, that you have those questions prepared to ask the school and ask the evaluator. You also want to provide documents that you want the IEP team to consider. So maybe there's some new medical records or documentation from your child's private therapist. Maybe there's something you've been working on at home that's really worked well and you want to tell the school about. If you can give that information and those documents ahead of time to the school, and also make sure you specifically request when you give those documents to the school, can you please have so-and-so and so-and-so review this ahead of the meeting. That way you're putting the school on notice that you want to talk about these things, and you're giving the school an opportunity to read those documents so that they're prepared to talk about those things. A lot of times parents, understandably, because they're busy or they just don't know, may not bring those documents until the day before the meeting or the day of the meeting. And then a lot of times the school's answer is, well, we need to look into that more. Oh, we'll follow up on that. And that's just delaying the process or missing out on an opportunity to really discuss that information when it's fresh. The next thing you want to do is, if you're the one requesting the IEP meeting, make sure you have a clear agenda and submit that to the school ahead of time. Specifically, what do you want to be talking about? Now remember too, depending on how much time is generally allotted for IEP meetings at your school, you really want to make sure you have enough time to fully discuss each thing on the agenda. Otherwise, you may kind of half go through or rush everything. So considering what's on that agenda, make sure it's specific. Also make sure that it's not so long that you can't fully address everything in one IEP meeting session. If you do have a lot of different items going on, maybe request that ahead of time you're scheduling 2 IEP meeting sessions so that you have that time scheduled ahead of time to really fully discuss the needs of your child. Next thing is, if you are gonna, again, be discussing an evaluation, something you may wanna consider is requesting from the school that the person who actually did the school's evaluation is present. So the regulations only require that someone who can interpret the evaluation is present, but you may wish to ask for the person who actually did the evaluation to be present, because that person may be able to speak to how the test was administered, other methods, things that happened in that environment of that testing, things that someone who may understand the report and can fully, accurately, with expertise, explain the report and what it means, just may not know because it didn't get to the report. So that's something else you may want to consider, whether or not you're okay with having somebody step in who's qualified to evaluate that report, or if you want the actual person conducting that evaluation, or who had conducted that evaluation, to be present. The next thing I want to talk about with submitting this information prior to the IEP meeting to the school is IEP meeting recording. So this is something that for parents who have thought about this, know it's really a personal decision and there's some rules around it. So parents and schools have a right to audio record meetings. Don't have a right to video record, but you can request permission to video record. But that's up to the school. Generally, the school is probably not going to give that permission, but you do have a right to audio record an IEP meeting. Now, the Virginia regulations do state that parents have to give advance notice in writing to the school about recording. If the parent fails to give that advance notice, they do have to give a copy to the school of the recording. This is something that has pros and cons, and I think both parents and advocates have different stances and positions about whether or not to record a particular IEP meeting, whether or not they record every IEP meeting. I know some advocates do I record every IEP meeting I go to. There's some pros and cons, and it's really another situation with a lot of things in special education that's going to be very fact specific. So some of the pros of recording an IEP meeting is that you've got a record. If 6 months from now, people can't exactly recall what was discussed, you have that record. If there's a dispute later on, you have that audio recording. On the other hand, it's really important for parents to remember that this is a long relationship with the school, right? A lot of times you may be working with central office or certain staff within a school for several years, maybe even the child's whole educational career. And to the extent that you have a good relationship with the IEP team and you're pretty collaborative, and brainstorming and positive in those interactions, sometimes bringing a recording tape to the table can kind of quiet that conversation. It seems more adversarial. Sometimes people not necessarily get defensive, but they're a little more reserved. They know they're being recorded. They may not be as candid or may be afraid to throw out an idea because they know they're being recorded. So that's something to consider. There's pros and cons. Again, some families, some advocates recorded every IEP meeting no matter what. Some parents have determined that, you know, in their particular circumstances, that recording it is the appropriate thing to do. But those are it's another thing to consider. And if you're going to be doing that, definitely let the school know ahead of time in writing. Also, if you're going to be inviting those outside individuals to the IEP meeting, that's something that you want to be able to tell the school about ahead of time. Again, kind of going back to that relationship with the school, to the extent that you have or are hoping to maintain or achieve a good collaborative relationship with the school, giving them appropriate notice that someone is going to be attending, a coach, a mentor, someone from the community, gives them the opportunity to be aware. Also to, depending on the amount of attendees and participants at an IEP meeting, a certain conference room size may need to be used, you know, pre-COVID when we were all meeting together, or there may be other logistical concerns. You know, schools, especially with the virtual format of IEP meetings right now, are sending out links to IEP meetings virtually. So having that list of attendees is important so they can, you know, make sure that person's updated on the logistics. So that's just something else to make sure you're informing the school ahead of time if you're going to be doing. So we've kind of moved out of our preparation stage, let's, you know, make sure the school's prepared too for this meeting, and we're at the day of our IEP meeting. And before I move forward here, I'm just going to pause for a quick minute to see if anybody has any questions. Devin told me that there's a little bit of a lag between me talking and you guys hearing me. So I'm just going to pause for a second. And Devin, if there is any questions, please let me know. Okay, guys, I'm going to keep on moving, but if you're in the middle of typing any questions, Devin is just going to let me know in real time, and I can always pause and answer your questions as we go through the rest of this meeting. or the rest of this session. So one big thing I really like to emphasize with IEP meetings is the first step you can take, besides some of those prep steps, but the first step on the day of that IEP meeting you can take to set the tone for a really positive IEP meeting is to arrive on time. And if possible, even 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes prior to the start of that IEP meeting. Most schools have blocked out a certain amount of time for staff to be available to attend those IEP meetings. Arriving late cuts into that time to talk about your child's needs. It just sets the tone that, a lot of teachers have taken their time out of their schedules to attend the meeting. They're ready to discuss, they're ready to go. And when everyone else at the table is sitting around waiting on a parent, that can just sometimes set the wrong tone for the IEP meeting. And you really want to make sure that tone is set well so that everyone is open to collaborating and talking about the needs of your student and that your child or student you're advocating for, and that the focus is on that student, not on the fact, oh, I've been, waiting here for 15, 20 minutes and now we only have 45 minutes and we have so much to get through. We want the focus to be on the student. Now I completely understand, again, especially with COVID going on, parents are juggling so much. Things are changing every day, things pop up last minute. So to the extent that you do have an emergency that arrives and you're going to be late or you have to cancel, just again, think about common courtesy, etiquette, things like that. Just let the school know as soon as you can. It can be a one-liner email, family emergency, going to be 15 minutes late, can we reschedule? Could be a quick call. Whatever is kind of the appropriate communication based on that relationship with the IEP team and how your school normally communicates, to let them know what's going on, so that they know you're on your way if you're going to be a couple of minutes late. That can really, assuage people. For me, I'm a little type A. I like to always be early, and if I know someone's a couple of minutes late, I'm like, okay, they're coming, they're on their way. If I haven't heard from somebody, I'm kind of wondering, okay, did something happen? Are they okay? What do we need to do? So sending out that communication if you are going to be late, is really going to set that tone, and to the extent that you can get there on time or a few minutes early, that's really helpful. Now, next, we're going to talk about during the IEP meeting. Again, in regards to tone, at dLCV, we always say, try to be sad, not mad as a parent. We understand that sometimes you're coming to an IEP meeting because something isn't going right. The child has a need that's not met. Maybe you feel that the school hasn't been listening to what you've been trying to communicate. You may be frustrated, you may be upset. But again, to the extent that you can display it in a compassionate way, in a professional way, that's gonna do more for your child. It's gonna open up people's minds and be more collaborative and try to problem solve. And a good example I like to use here is, there's two ways to approach a problem. Say you're coming to an IEP meeting, you can say option one, Ms. Jones, my child, he needs time between transitions. Transitions are really hard for him. And she just takes away his paper and puts down the next one and doesn't give him any time to transition. And this really has him result in a meltdown. And then he cannot concentrate on the next subject. And that Ms. Jones, how does she not understand? And Ms. Jones is going to get very defensive. She may get quiet. Anyone else at the table may try to defend Ms. Jones. Whereas if you say something along the lines of, for the same problem, my son, he has some difficulties transitioning. It's something we work on and we struggle with at home too. I really think it would be helpful if we can give him a timer that counts down as his last subject is ending, and that he gets 2 minutes to transition in between to pack up his stuff. One gentle reminder from the teacher is good to transition beforehand, but multiple reminders are just gonna upset him. Or you can explain the problem, that your child has difficulties with transitions, and you don't know what the solution is. You can say, this is something we struggle with at home too. We've tried this and this, it doesn't work. We think these things may help, but we're not sure. We really don't know what to do. Do you guys have any ideas? And that's something, there's kind of two approaches there you can take. But either of those are more collaborative than the first example I portrayed. And then out of those second two, you're either maybe advocating for a certain thing that works or you think will work, or the second one, you're opening it up for collaboration, for ideas, and you can always put forward recommendations after that. Now hang on one second here. If I sit for too long, my lights go off. So I just had to do a little bit of stretching. So at the IEP meeting, don't forget about your checklist. Go through that checklist, make sure everything is met. If you end up running out of time and you don't get through your checklist, don't rush. Don't try to smush things in there together. Just ask the IEP team, hey, we got through these things. We didn't get through these. Let's schedule a next IEP meeting to discuss the rest of these concerns or these items. Ask questions. A lot of times, especially with evaluations, evaluators are just going through and they're on a roll because they understand the jargon. Sometimes it's hard for experts in a field. I know I struggle with this too, to talk about it from a perspective that a lay person or someone without knowledge can understand. So they may not even realize that they're talking up here and your level is right here. So ask questions, you know, politely say, excuse me, can you go back a second? I don't understand that. Take notes. Not everything gets into that prior written notice, which is that outline of kind of what was occurred, what was discussed at that IEP meeting. And then you can use those notes later on to request maybe in addition to the prior written notice or the IEP if something is missing. At the end of the meeting, a lot of times schools will recap what happened at the IEP meeting, make sure that they're not missing anything. And if they don't recap, ask for a recap, or you can recap to make sure everyone's on that same page right at the end. Let me talk just really quickly here. We've only got a couple minutes left about signing the IEP. So if you agree, you can sign it. You can sign it on the spot. You don't have to. A lot of times schools give it to you to say, hey, you can sign it. We can go ahead. If you need a second to take a look over that to make sure you understand that IEP, don't feel pressured to sign it right there. You can take it home for a few days. Now, understand that that IEP will not be implemented. New services will not be started until you sign it and consent. But you can do that. You can take some time. That's an important document. You want to make sure you understand and agree to it. Now, if you agree to some things but not to others, the Department of Education does allow for partial consent, where you can sign it and say, I agree to this, but I don't agree to this. Now, that's something that I really caution about, and while you can do that, it is later up to interpretation and reasonable interpretation, and if that's not clear, even if you had a certain intent, if the school reasonably interpreted that to mean something else, then a hearing officer or other decision maker may not find in your favor if their interpretation was reasonable. Another option you have in those cases is to just have an IEP amendment or addendum that says everything in the prior IEP is exactly the same. The only things that we're changing is we're adding in extra speech services. And that way you can sign that addendum and you're not changing anything else in the IEP that still needs to be discussed or that's disagreed on currently, but you're making that change and starting those services that you and the school agree to. So that's a really good other option that's a little clearer than trying to write in your partial consent and explain it on paper. After the IEP meeting, make sure that prior written notice that's issued contains everything that was discussed at the meeting that's important. You can request it to be changed if you think things need to be added or incorrect. If the school refuses to do that, you can add in a new letter, a letter to the school to ask to be included in your child's educational record that outlines everything that you wanted included in the prior written notice that wasn't. And then follow up with the school as necessary to make sure steps are being implemented and things are going well. So we're at the end of our time right now. I hope you all had took some of those tips back and can either share them with the families you work with or use them for your own child to help have a productive and collaborative IEP meeting that's going to really help your child get the services they need. Thank you, everybody.